Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell calling to order the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission regular open meeting for Thursday, January 11th. It's 10 a.m. in beautiful snowing Santa Fe. Mr. Cameron, could you call the roll?
Commissioner Ellison?
Present.
Commissioner O'Connell?
Present.
Commissioner Aguilera?
Present.
All commissioners are here and you have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. So next step is a pledge of allegiance and a state pledge. Okay, so next item is consideration and approval of the agenda. I've got one item need to address there, which is if you look at the consent action items, transportation matters number 1. We noticed case number 23-00397-TREN as one of the dockets that's covered by this potential order. That case number does not exist. So just removing that from the agenda, it's just a typo. There is a 23-00397, but it's not an EN case. It was a ministerially addressed application for service. So anyway, we need to acknowledge that that item is not included in the potential order that we're going to be looking at. So I'm proposing to acknowledge that by deleting it. Other than that, commissioners, do you have any changes you'd like to see to the agenda?
I don't have any. I don't either. Thank you.
Okay, then I move that we'll proceed with the agenda that was posted with deleting case number 23-00397-TREN from the consent agenda.
I second. Commissioner Ellison?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell?
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, your motion to approve the amended agenda passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next item on agenda is a first of the year item, elect chair of the commission. This commission, the 3 of us vote to elect chair, and it's a role that you carry for a year, but I suppose we could entertain a motion as the year goes on if things get too unruly. But so anyway, just the practice is to do it once a year. In moving into that agenda item, I'll just say that I would like to serve as chair for another year. So opening up that item for discussion.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment on that. You know, view on this is that I believe Commissioner O'Connell has done a great job at running our meetings. They've only gotten more smoother as the year progresses, as the year progressed. At the same time, I would like to note that the tradition of the commission has been a rotating chair. And you know, I would like to discuss my views on that. You know, it's been said that the chair is the person who presides at meetings, and in fact, that is what the legislation provides for. And I do think that the change in commissioner on a rotating basis really emphasizes that it is the person who is leading meetings and does not necessarily imply additional authority. I think having the rotating chair does encourage collegiality and equality amongst the commissioners. And frankly, I do see the rotating chair as a check on the authority of the chair. And the way I see that is that, you know, certainly it's possible that informal arrangements could be put in place. And if you know somebody else is going to occupy that position in a year, I think it encourages restraint, and it encourages collegiality in making decisions on process that impact our public meetings. I do think that kind of collegiality and equality amongst the commissioners is what the legislature intended. Obviously, we recently had a constitutional change and a change in statute on the PRC. And I think if the legislature had intended some other role for the chair, that it had a chance to make changes, and it decided not to make those changes. So, you know, really my thinking is a position of principle, and it's not related to Commissioner O'Connell or any personal issues. It's my viewpoint that the rotating chair is healthy for the commission.
Do you have any discussion you'd like to add, or I mean, I can give my 2 cents on why I think it's okay to continue for another year, but sure. I hear what you're saying. It definitely was the practice of the commission, but many things have changed. We went from 5 to 3, went from elected to appointed. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that there is no role that any of us have that's greater than being commissioner. Because that's really, if you look at our jobs and what our authority or power, or whatever word you want to use, comes from, it comes from voting in these meetings. It's not from anything else that we do. So having said that, I think lots of changes happen, so that it kind of makes sense to me that what do we want to be maintain some continuity for? I'd like to maintain some continuity with what we've done over this past year. And why I feel that way is it's actually, I mean, not to go deeper in this maybe than I need to, it's been weird to transition from myself to an abstraction, which was something that happens when you become a commissioner. You're a commissioner, not Jim anymore, you know, so that's an interesting process that I've gone through personally. You're right. The only thing that I really do as chair is organize these meetings. And then, but if you have that next to your name, people come at you with questions, requests, all those kind of things, just because it's a name that people, if they want to approach one person, they do it. So really, the real nuts and bolts of a chair for this commission is reducing transaction costs for the three of us. You know, having some person to put the agenda together. I spend time every week working on that, and that's time you don't have to spend. You're welcome to spend it, but you don't have to because it's something I got to do. It also instead of somebody coming at all three of us individually and then the three of us wondering what to do about it, you just have a channel for that. So that's really how the chair exists or functions. And then why I want to do it is I just have been over this year of transition gotten to where I'm starting to feel more comfortable about how to do it. So it's like I've earned a concept of how to do this job. And so if we give it to somebody else, then they get to spend a year wondering how to do this right until we get to the next year and pick another chair. And where that's really interesting is if you're running the meeting, it's your job to really make sure everybody gets heard. But my big job is to be a commissioner and bring my independent, unique voice to the discussion when we're voting on things. That's where I find it's really interesting is I come into the meeting with this is the way this ought to be, but I need to listen to you and I need to listen to you. And then I also need to be able to learn from what I heard and maybe have a wholly different outcome than what I came into the meeting for. So that's really the chair skill that I think I've earned over the last year and that I want to build on and continue for one more year. Then having made that big speech, the other thing I acknowledge is this is not a lifetime appointment. It's just my argument for me is let's maintain continuity with something that seems to be working well in the moment. Recognizing everything you said is also true.
Well, thank you both for those explanations. I think all very good points. I mean, I do value and see value in the historical practice of rotating the chair. I think it's important also to make sure that, we're not turning this into, like a partisan issue. I think we've been very good about voting what we individually think is fair. And so I do really appreciate that and see value in the rotation. At the same time, I do recognize that we are in a different structure now, being appointed. And so we don't necessarily need to do the same thing that we've done before. And this is an important discussion because we might be in a way creating what, through this conversation, what the new practice will be, even if it's not written in statute and becomes just generally understood. So I appreciate hearing both of those views, and balancing the principles that you've each explained in having the rotation to make it fair, having continuity and consistency. I think that's important as well. Not just for the industry, but for the staff who works here at the agency. So I think maybe there is a balance that we can, that we can discuss in terms of rotation. I mean, I do recognize that 1 year, it kind of, I'm kind of seeing it two ways. 1 year to do something isn't, to like carry the agency and lead it in a certain direction is not really enough time to accomplish something. When you think about things like rulemakings, they take such a long time, right? So 1 year might not even be enough to see an entire rulemaking through. And at the same time, then we're also talking about what is the role of the chair? Well, the role of the chair is on paper to run these meetings, and we do need to have a chair, right? I don't think that an agency can work with at least like on the administrative and personnel side, like having 3 separate voices. Thankfully we have a chief of staff. So I guess the question that I want to raise for each of you is, is there some kind of balance that we can strike to accommodate all of these important and reasonable points that have been made?
Sorry, I'm listening to that thing. Are we talking about the proverbial cut the baby in half? Or I mean, to me, it's we're going to elect somebody every year. Again, I also think it's possible there isn't a date where this happens. It's just supposed to happen once a year. And this has happened in other commissions, if I go crazy or somehow become incapacitated, you'd need to elect a different chair anyway. So it's not like it has to happen. Couldn't happen more than once a year, right? So having said that, I think if you take the long view, just voting today and then voting again soon is a balance.
Well, I guess one, to be more specific, one thing that, came to my mind is, can we give the chair more time by, for example, rotating it every 2 years? And it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. But, I guess I was seeing that maybe as a balance to ensure that we continue to value the historical practice of the rotation, but also recognize that we are under a different paradigm now, and there is also value to continuity and consistency.
I think it would be fine to have a discussion today and maybe a vote at our next meeting, if you'd like, just to allow us to explore it a bit more and think about it a bit more. I guess I think it's important to think about, the role of the chair in making this decision, and how I really see the leadership of the chair in a group of equals is that, this person is naturally going to be more focused on the agency as a whole and process as a whole than the other 2 commissioners, just because of having been elected to that position. I see that leadership being that chair would, identify some issue, articulate a vision, there'd be a discussion amongst the commissioners, and then there'd be a vote. So, I guess that's sort of my vision for, first among equals, or how, the chair would lead, as opposed to having authority to make changes in the organization that were not agreed upon. And, I guess that's really my concern is that potential for having unagreed upon process changes. I think it's, we all agree the chair presides over the meetings. You can extend that to say, okay, then the chair should set the agenda, although in the past, I don't think that's how it worked. I think that agenda setting function was in the Office of General Counsel, and the commissioners would each express their desires. So I think that has been a change. And then, you could extend that to sort of overall scheduling responsibility for all cases. And, I'm just not sure. It just feels like we're getting further away from, what in my view, the legislature intended. So those are my concerns.
I guess just 2 cents on that. The process for setting the agenda is OGC driven. The agenda comes together by OGC attorneys nominating items to be on the agenda. And then we have a check-in meeting that I sift through those and I try to represent all three of us. Like, why is this on this meeting? Why is this not on that meeting? We have follow-up items, like we are still due a presentation on the wildfire management plans. So those are the kind of things that get discussed in that meeting. Which agenda, how soon can we get that? When should it be there? And then the chief of staff's office is at that meeting because they've got the logistical issue of writing the agenda and getting it posted on the webpage. So the fact that you don't participate in that doesn't mean you can't. And so, frankly, that your vision of chair sounded way more powerful than what I know I've been doing. And so if we ever get to a situation where it feels like that's happening, I think you have an obligation to raise that. And that, to me, is a better vehicle for addressing, is the chair doing what the chair is supposed to be doing, is hold the chair accountable in public, rather than read something that's not there in the legislation.
So I appreciate hearing your views, Commissioner Ellison. I think this is obviously an important issue. I do want to emphasize, once again, that the setting of the agenda and things that are being voted on are being driven by statutory deadlines and our staff's ability to be able to process those cases as timely as possible. So I just don't want the audience to come away with a different idea that there's kind of like different priorities being taken care of first than others. But I do recognize the sentiment that Commissioner Ellison is explaining, and I think for me, I've been kind of focused on the things that I've been really focused on, and then doing the work as it lands on my desk, and haven't really felt like I don't have the ability to pursue the things that I want, that I believe New Mexico needs more of. And so I think that there is you know, a concern that was explained and certainly something that we should address somehow. I don't have a solution at the top of my head right now, but I do suggest that we reevaluate the agenda setting process so that we all feel like we have an equal ability to put on the agenda, you know, the cases, if there is something that is not being on the agenda, that is not being put on the agenda, that we have the ability to do that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And part of that is my view of it is an open process and you have the opportunity to do that now. So if you're not, that's a very important discussion to have. And I think that's different than do we elect the chair today or not? And do we elect the chair every 2 years or do we elect the chair every 5 years? That if you're feeling like you don't have access to the agenda setting process, that's wrong. So that has to be addressed. I mean, my point of view is we've got 4 cycles of emails that come out and nobody weighs in on those. You actually did this week for this agenda and you had an impact on what the agenda says. So that's great. But again, going back to transaction costs, if I wasn't chair, I'd be grateful that I don't have to watch these emails as they're flying through, trusting that, hey, there's a team I trust that's putting this thing in place. And knowing when I get to the meeting, if there's something I want to correct, I have that opportunity too. But that's just my perspective of how this agenda setting process is working. If you have a different one, we definitely need to work it out, fix it. But that's different than electing the chair.
Yeah. You know, I also want to note with respect to setting the agenda is, you know, we're still building ourselves, right? We're still working on ourselves and improving. And in fact, we have a lot of new and really good OGC attorneys that have joined us recently. That is really bolstering our ability to do the best job we can. You know, I think one potential solution to consider is, you know, once we're comfortable to really put more of that on OGC as sort of a more equal way of deciding what is on the agenda this week versus 2 weeks from now.
And I'd also say we did make the change because the process that was happening wasn't working. I remember vividly you talking about us being in a ticket system and we were having weekly meetings and we were getting agendas with no input and no ability to affect the agenda. And then when we would ask for changes, we weren't getting changes. So that's why part of the transition to 2 weekly, also having frankly, a more open process that includes more than just OGC sending us an email was necessary. So if it's time to recheck that process, that'd be great too. But like as Commissioner Aguilera just said, we've been evolving over the year. Going back to why I want to be chair again is I feel like we're just getting to the norming stage of building this team. And so I don't want to disrupt that process. Because I've thought about that. I don't want to be selfish either. If somebody else wants to be chair, then I'll help you do that. So.
You know, I'm going to propose that we postpone this decision until next meeting. I think we've had a good discussion and it's good food for thought, and I see nothing wrong with deciding this in our next meeting.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I really appreciate hearing your views. I appreciate Commissioner Ellison raising his views. You know, and so I think for me, it would be better to take more time to consider them, right? Because we there's no reason to well, we'd be better off, you know, as you said, being able to think about it further. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to use my handy dandy Robert's Rules slider. So what, do we need a motion? What would the
You know,
motion be?
I move to table this topic
Do we even
for
need
next
to?
week.
Yeah, that's what I don't know if we even need a motion. Do we just quit talking about it and move to the next item? Do we suspend? Don't know if it matters, but. So I guess the other thing I read about Robert Rules is there's only 3 of us, so this is important when you've got a big assembly. So I think the 3 of us are in agreement. We'll take it up in 2 weeks. So we'll just do that. Okay, next item on the agenda is public comment. I checked in with Mr. Rodriguez before the meeting and I'm not sure that there is anyone scheduled for public comment. Could you just verify that, Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is no one registered.
Okay, I will move forward based on the conversation I had before the meeting that nobody had registered for public comment. Is there anybody here that wants to give public comment? Okay, so we don't have any public comment at this meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
just to cover the bases on the election of the chair of the commission, I think maybe the right way to do it is to have somebody move to postpone that to a definite time or date, and then do the motion process like that, and then we make sure we cover all the bases.
Okay, then I move, going back to the item on the agenda, I move that we postpone election of the chair until the next regularly scheduled meeting, which is 2 weeks from today.
My second.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, your motion to postpone the election of the chair of the commission to the next regularly scheduled open meeting, which is in 2 weeks from today on January 25th, passes unanimously.
Thank you. And we've already addressed public comments, so I'm going to move on to announcements. We'll start with Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have, well, 2 things. One, very short, that at some point in the near future, I hope to, in this time in my part of the agenda, talk about things that are coming, give a little preview for the audience, for the regulated entities of what's kind of coming down the road in the next couple meetings. I'm not ready to do that yet today. And then the other thing I had was a recitation of the closed meeting that we had. This one was on Friday, December 22nd. The commission met in closed session, which was closed pursuant to NMSA 1978. Section 10-15-1 H3, deliberations by a public body in connection with administrative adjudicatory proceeding. And I affirm for the record that the matters discussed in the closed session were limited only to those specified in the notice and agenda for that meeting, specifically deliberations regarding case number 22-00270-UT in the matter of the application of Public Service Company of New Mexico for revision of its retail electric rates pursuant to advice notice number 595. And I further affirm that no official or final actions were taken at that meeting.
Thank you. So that's it for General Counsel.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then I have a couple announcements. First, most important, want to introduce a new employee at the Public Regulation Commission, Miguel Perez. Miguel is going to serve as an advisor, technical advisor to the 3 of us. So he's joined a select group of folks with a 3-headed boss in this commission, but Michael comes to us with great credentials out of the utility program at New Mexico State and most recently from the Nevada Commission. So welcome, Miguel, and looking forward to what you can do here. Next item is a recitation for a meeting that we had on Monday. So Monday, January 8th, 2024, the commission met in closed session, which was held pursuant to NMSA 1978 10-15-1H3, deliberations by a public body in connection with an administrative adjudicatory proceeding. I affirm for the record that the matters discussed in the closed session were limited only to those specified in the notice and agenda for that meeting, specifically deliberations regarding case number 23-00251 UT, which is the matter of Public Service Company New Mexico's application for approval of a purchase power agreement and an energy storage agreement pursuant to 17.9.551 NMAC. I further affirm that no official or final actions were taken. And then last, I just like to announce that opportunities for folks to observe the commission doing its work in between these regular open meetings. So between now and the next meeting, we've got a hearing in case number 23-00071 UT. That's the community solar phase 2. So topic of that is tariffs on the community solar projects. So that hearing will start on January 17th at 9 a.m. And as our practice right now, those hearings are available on YouTube. If you can also go to the commission webpage to look at other ways to access that information. Commissioners, do you have any other announcements?
No, thank you. I do not.
Me either, thank you.
Okay, so next up is Employee of the Month, which is delightfully surprising for me. I think Commissioner Ellison has the honor this month. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do have the honor of presenting our Employee of the Month. And in fact, this month, it is plural employees of the month. We did not have an employee of the month for December. And the employees of the month are Mr. Anthony Medeiros and Mr. Christopher Ryan. And I think it will be evident to everyone listening why they were chosen as employees of the month. They obviously went above and beyond with this most recent P&M rate case. Mr. Medeiros' section on Four Corners was about half of the recommended decision and was longer than many whole recommended decisions. Mr. Ryan handled absolutely everything else, including return on equity, the company debt equity ratio, and every other issue, including the Palo Verde prudency and remedy issue. They both worked incredibly long hours and hard on this. And beyond just their hard work, their dedication to the public interest and to public service was evident and goes to the very core of what we do. So congratulations to Mr. Medeiros and Mr. Ryan for a job well done.
Yeah, here. Like to, and I think Mr. Medeiros probably wasn't able to see this because he's running another hearing right now, right? So thank you to both of them. Okay, so, and then Mr. Lundin, apparently you're gonna have to split your belt into two. Oh, haven't seen him here yet today. Next item on the agenda is approval of prior meeting minutes. We have minutes from the December 14th regular open meeting and December 21st regular open meeting. I reviewed those and corrected some typos in the version that's in board effect. But didn't know if commissioners, if you have changes that you would like to make to the draft minutes we have in front of us.
I just saw a typo myself on the second one. So I can check to see if that's been addressed. But on page 5, it should be the BV plant. V is in Victor, because it's the Buena Vista.
Yeah, I corrected 2 of those in that
Okay.
paragraph, and yeah, we were talking about BV 1 and the plant is Buena Vista 1, so that's just a good reminder for Ms. Byers that when we're throwing acronyms around, it would be helpful probably. Well, and then also, I guess a transcript gets generated by YouTube. If you've ever looked at that, that's a fun way to see how your words get mingled.
I don't have any additional edits.
Okay, so then I will move for approval of the prior meeting minutes.
And I'm sorry, just one other, I'm not sure if the name for the public commenter in the first one is correct.
Yeah, that was another one.
That was it. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion for approval of the prior meeting minutes. Need a second.
A second.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion to approve the prior meeting minutes passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, so then on our consent agenda, we have 3 matters, a potential order in the transportation realm that included a bunch of docket numbers. Just reminder, by editing this agenda, we're not considering 23-0039 TREN. But other than that, we've got potential orders in 3 dockets. Is there any discussion on the consent items?
None for me.
I don't have any. Thank you.
Okay, then I'll move for approval of the potential order on the consent agenda.
I second.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion to approve the potential orders for the consent agenda items passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, so that moves us to the regular action agenda. The first item is a utility matter. It's the remand from EPE's rate case. So, Mr. Fisk, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, I apologize for not being there in person. I have an inclined driveway. Sometimes it's hard to get out when it's with fresh snow and ice. With regard to this matter, of course, this concerns the remand of regarding El Paso's most recent rate case. As you recall, there were three holdings that were overturned and required adjustments going forward to the revenue requirement. And then one of the big questions, of course, with regard to the time period that's already passed, the time period during which the appeal was pending, whether that could be recovered. And the commission determined in its final order of remand that portion cannot be recovered because that would violate they'll be considered unlawful retroactive rate making under the precedents that are discussed in the final order on remand, and as per staff's analysis and my own analysis of those cases. But in the final order on remand, the commission did 2 things that are being raised by the city of Las Cruces, Mary Lee Souls, and Doñana County as issues that should be reconsidered. One is that the commission did allow for the creation of a regulatory asset as requested by EPE, just for the portion of the retrospective adjustment starting with the date of the issuance of mandate when the commission received jurisdiction of the matter back from the court through the effective date of the revised rates that will recover the increased corrected revenue requirement. The city and the other movements, I'll just call them the movements, they say that if the analysis that's applied in the Mountain States case as clarified in the US West case should precludes the commission itself from relating this order, the final order and remand, back to the date of the mandate. And they say that the commission should apply the same analysis to that period as applies to the previous period, the period that the commission is not allowing recovery for. And the movements also have raised issues with regard to the use of the regulatory asset mechanism to handle this type of matter. And I can the order that I have drafted does not address some of the arguments that are simply repeated arguments that were already raised earlier in the case by these movements and then dealt with in the final order and remand. But it does address some arguments that are new or that pertain particularly to the content of the final order on remand. And so I'm just looking at my order, the discussion, the findings and conclusions with regard to the motion for rehearing address the claim that I just mentioned, that the same analysis under Mountain States and US West should preclude the commission from providing any kind of retrospective adjustment, even going back to the date of the mandate. And this order would have the commission respond that analysis does not apply because the analysis in both of those cases what concerned the powers of the court. And the court was saying that it did not have legislative power to go back to the, over the period. It could not, essentially, its decision couldn't be considered retroactive for the period during which the appeal was pending. So the commission, also could not recover for that period. But it does not, those cases do not address when the commission fully has authority over the matter. And the court actually clarified in a subsequent case that its statement in Mountain States alone does not preclude the PRC from implementing a retroactive procedure. So the claim that same analysis should apply with regard to the post-mandate period is not a valid argument. Moving on to the movement's claims that there are problems with the use of a regulatory asset. The movement's claim that in the RD itself, there was a minimum 5-year period for amortization of any regulatory asset that was established in that order in the RD. The RD actually addresses a couple of different regulatory assets and actually applies different amortization periods to each one based on the particular characteristics of the regulatory asset. It does not establish a general requirement for all regulatory assets. EPE requested a 3-year amortization period. Staff agreed with that. And there's a benefit to that in that, the commission and the final order also allowed for carrying charges for the regulatory asset. And using a shorter period means less less that the ratepayers will have to pay in carrying charges. And also the size of the adjustment for the regulatory asset is about $500,000, which is really not very large for a regulatory asset. So it would not be rate shock to require amortization over a 3-year period, and it would actually save money overall for the ratepayers. The order will also reject the claim that the final order on remand is unclear regarding the scope of the regulatory asset approval. It simply refers the movements back to paragraph 25 of the final order. It's quite clear that the commission is adopting EPE's request, but as modified by staff, because staff also agreed with the commission that the period, there should be no regulatory asset for the pre-mandate period. And everything else is quite clear in the order. I don't really see how the movements could be unclear on what the scope of the regulatory asset will be. This also addresses that the movements arguments concerning a previous docket of the commission from 2018 regarding a regulatory asset, a very different kind of regulatory asset than this one. The movements claim that the commission should apply the analysis of the Vermont Public Service Board. And by doing so, the commission violated its own precedent. Well, looking back at the RD in that matter, that test, there was a 4-part test for determining whether regulatory assets should be approved in Vermont. But the commission, the hearing examiner in that case simply was laying out how the Vermont Service Board analyzes those matters, but didn't adopt the test. So the final order didn't adopt the test. So that test is not the commission's own precedent. And finally, the movements argue that the commission's approval, that we're moving on to a different topic, the fuel clause reconciliation request. There were a number, this is overturned by the court, the denial. The commission had denied EP's request for approval of the fuel clause reconciliation that was requested by EPE for 2017 to 2019, because the reason that was given by the hearing examiner and adopted by the commission was that there hadn't been in the record any evidence filed by staff or any intervener that supported it. And that was described, EP objected to that before the court on the basis that that had never been a requirement before for approving such a reconciliation. And so that was overturned on due process grounds. And in this, when it came back to us, we agreed with staff that there's no problem with approving this reconciliation request. There's language in the final order on remand as to the scope of that, of the reconciliation, of the approval of the reconciliation. It's in accordance with the RD, but because we simply, the commission couldn't or demand that EPE provide something that they didn't know they had to provide. Plus, I would note EPE wouldn't have any control over whether staff or an intervener would provide testimony. So I think the RD was also wrong in saying that there has to be staff or intervener testimony, because this is a request EPE made. How could they demand that from another party? So in any event, the movements complain about object to that, saying that the staff affirmation is not sufficient evidence for the commission to adopt staff's recommendation. Of course, there was also the evidence that was in that was presented in the case by EPE And the movements erroneously characterized the court's decision as calling for additional proceedings concerning the reconciliation request. And this order would say, and then, but the court actually found that EPE's due process rights have been violated by the lack of notice as to this quote unquote evidentiary requirement. So the court is clearly, I mean, the commission is clearly in line with the court by saying, okay, this reconciliation can be approved. Staff has looked at it; it can be approved. We can't require, we're not going to require further proceedings. So I can move on to the motion for stay, unless anyone would like to ask questions about the motion for rehearing at this point. Okay, I will go on to the motion for stay. So simultaneously with filing the motion for rehearing, the movements moved for a partial stay of the commission's order, just as to those portions to which they object in the motion for rehearing. This would be a motion for partial stay pending an appeal. There's been no appeal filed because instead the movements filed the motion for rehearing. But if the commission rejects or denies the motion for rehearing, then the movements say, they will be appealing, and they first have to ask the commission under the court's rules. First, they have to come to the commission and ask for a stay or partial stay. And then if it's denied by the commission, then the movements can take that before the court and ask the court to review the commission's order denying the motion for stay as basically appellate review of that order. The movements correctly applied, or they applied the correct analysis that the commission and the court have applied in the past, the 4 Telecom factors from a well-known case about stays. The first factor is the likelihood of the movements to prevail on appeal. And here, I'm looking at paragraph 27. The commission simply notes that the commission would note that and incorporate by reference the findings and conclusions about the motion for rehearing and about the final order of remand, because that goes to the heart of whether they're likely to prevail in an appeal, because it goes to the substance, and it's not. So that's just incorporated there and not repeated. With regard to the technical factor that there will be irreparable harm to the movements as a result of if the stay is denied. This order would say that if the movements were to prevail on appeal, the appeal would likely be completed before the recovery of the regulatory asset had begun. Appeals can stretch out, 2.5, 3 years. Sometimes they do go over that period, but EPA has affirmed that it will not file another rate case until after 2025, at least 2 years from the date of this order, and that rate case will take at least a year. So there's 3 years built in, at least for this, and so actually it's quite likely that an appeal would be completed by that time. Especially as this is an appeal of would be a fairly narrow scope for an appeal. And then with regard to the factors of whether there be substantial harm to customers from the grant of a stay, the denial of the stay, the commission actually finds that there be substantial harm to customers from the grant of a stay as opposed to denial, because it's likely to result in a longer period of time over which carrying charges will apply. In case the appeal does bump out, further the consideration of when the prevents new rates from going to effect shortly after the rate case, then the regulatory asset will be out there for a longer period of time. And then for the same reasons, the commission would find that granting the requested stay is likely to harm the public interest. Generally, the public interest for the PRC is identical to the ratepayers' interest. And with that, I will take any questions.
I don't have any questions. Is there any?
Are there two versions of this order?
Yeah, there was frankly three, depending on how you navigated board effect. And I'm the reason there was three. And to me, it's kind of the Goldilocks thing. We have one order that's too long and one order that's too short and one that I think is just right. And so the one that I would propose we look at is the version that includes a discussion of the request for a stay, but doesn't reiterate everything that went into our decision for the decision on how to handle the remand. So of the three, that's the one that I would propose considering.
And Commissioner Allison, just before all commissioners actually, before this open meeting, I did make one correction to the longer order, which was my proposed order. What I do? Just to note the two filings that were made yesterday, which were staff's response in opposition to the motion for a rehearing and EPE's response in opposition to the motion for rehearing. I didn't include all of their reasoning because it's I see it as pretty much in line with what we already have. And they want the same result as this order would provide. So the order merely notes that those were filed in the procedural history.
I just like to understand the extra length in the version originally proposed. Is that to deal with the specific complaints raised by the complainants in this case, or is it a rehashing of what was discussed in our order?
My understanding of it was there weren't any new, in fact, the part of what got struck is that there aren't new issues raised in the motion for rehearing. And then broadly, why I was heading for an order that addressed nothing, because this really looks to me like the movements asserting their right to go to the Supreme Court to argue about things like the US West decision. And in that framework, we're just kind of a step along the way. So I was an advocate for let's just get out of the way and let them go to the Supreme Court. And so we don't need to spend, our position on the rehearing has moved from making a decision to being a litigant in the case before the Supreme Court. So I think we've spoken on the order and nothing new was raised in the motion on the motion for rehearing. Mr. Fisk convinced me that we did need to address the request for a stay, just because that was a new idea that we hadn't addressed yet. And then I guess just to jump forward in the discussion, I think it's worth it to acknowledge that we had two filings yesterday from staff and from EPE. So whatever gets approved ought to include that acknowledgement.
I think there was one issue that I don't recall addressing with respect to the length of the amortization. Can you speak to that, Mr. Fisk? Because I see that we address it in the longer version, which is part of what's been cut here. Did we address that in prior orders?
I'm not sure. I don't think that we did in the final order of remand, because some of these arguments are new in the motion for rehearing. the reason that I am okay with doing the order that doesn't include all of these specific arguments or reasoning regarding these arguments is that the commission can on appeal raise additional arguments that supporting the decision. So I see these particular issues as somewhat new because the amortization period, this was something I didn't remember, I don't recall being raised in previous filings by the city, as well as this idea that Vermont precedent is our own precedent. That was new. That case was discussed 18261 by the city earlier, but the claim that this is the Vermont's test is the commission's test as well wasn't raised. So I think that even if we did, for instance, if we had done if we did the motion, if the commission adopted the order that doesn't include this reasoning, we'd still be able to raise it on appeal. Because, and as you'll recall, when it comes to motions for rehearing, the commission can allow them to be denied by operation of law without any order, but the commission can still defend its order from any argument that's made on appeal. But I would say that these were specifically things that very specific arguments that I saw that I didn't see as being raised or addressed by the city and the movements or addressed by the commission specifically in the final order and remand, which is why I did include them here.
Yeah, I guess, I think more general comments, not necessarily specific to this case, but I guess the way I view how much and to what extent we need to address the arguments on rehearing has to do a lot with whether I believe responding to them now will help us on appeal or not. I was convinced by the original draft. It's the first one that I read, and I thought it did a good job of addressing some old and some new arguments. I appreciate, the point that Mr. Fisk made about us still being able to raise these arguments during the appeal, even if we don't raise them here. But we do have it written already, and I thought it was helpful. The other reason why, which is specific to this case, is I believe that the movements are in a way saying, Commission, you're not listening to us. And I am concerned that the shorter order might help them make that argument on appeal. I disagree that that's the case. And that's also why I like the longer version, because I think it does show that we are addressing everything that they have raised.
I'd like to add, I like the longer version in that, it looks pretty certain that this is going to appeal. And I think, with the amount of analysis and discussion here, it makes it that much harder for the movements to say that we've been arbitrary and capricious in denying this motion. So given that it's written, I would be in favor of adopting the initial version. I did want to make just a few comments on the substance of it. it seems like the main concern here is the formation of the regulatory asset from the time of the court mandate until the end of 2023. In my view, this is an accounting measure. It does nothing to actually change rates. The rate change would happen in the next rate case. And so in my view, this protest is not ripe for consideration. If they have a concern about this particular accounting asset being put into the rate base, the proper time to raise that is in the next rate case. I also think that they're arguing to the court that the commission cannot implement the court's decision. And personally, I like our odds of winning that particular argument. Also, I think that if we were talking about a rate credit, I very doubt that the movements would be complaining and arguing that we could not implement the rate credit for that same period of time. So I do view this argument as being short-sighted. Those are just some of my thoughts on the merits.
I want to add one more thing to my general view of the substance that we decide to include in rehearing orders, because I don't want to say that I think every case needs to have a lengthy discussion of all of the issues. I think there will be cases where the parties are really just raising the same arguments, and us reiterating our same responses aren't necessarily going to help us on appeal. So I think I think it's just a something we need to consider in any given case, on a case-by-case basis, to see, will we be helped on appeal if we spill more ink on this, or are we good as we are? So I just wanted to clarify that for OGC attorneys. Thank you.
So any further discussion, or is somebody ready to make a motion?
Given my preference for the longer order, I will move to approve the initial longer order that was provided by OGC. I do have just a couple of very small typos that I intend to send to Mr. Fisk if this is the order that is adopted.
I second that motion.
Okay, so just a bit of discussion before we vote. I'm gonna vote no just because I'm stuck on the shorter. The medium version is better than the long version, but I don't think there's a wrong answer here. So I guess one of my principles is, if we're a litigant in a case, we shouldn't be providing our opponent free legal services. So I value Mr. Fisk's time looking at the issues that are in front of us, not the ones that are behind us. But I hear what you're saying about, I don't want the movements to think we're not listening to them. I just think this appeal isn't our fight. I mean, they want to fight with the Supreme Court about what Supreme Court has said, and I'm interested to see how that turns out, but we just don't need to be another fist in that brawl. So that's why my belief is spill less ink. So that's why it won't be surprising. I'm saying that so it won't be surprising when I vote no when Mr. Cameron calls the roll.
Yeah, just a quick question. Can you elaborate on that part about, is there a concern that we are somehow giving more leverage with issuing the longer order?
It's not leverage, it's a conservation of our own resources.
Oh, okay.
That we shouldn't have to re-argue everything because it takes Mr. Fisk time to put this together, takes us time to review it.
I see.
Again, the real argument isn't our decision, it's what does the Supreme Court's previous ruling say? So.
I understand. Thank you.
Any more discussion? Are we ready to vote? Please call the roll.
Commissioner Allison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
No.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion to approve what we were calling the long order in matter 20-00104-UT passes 2-1.
So thank you, Mr. Fisk, and thank you for working with me on this one. Obviously, I was the one that caused you to do more work than I wanted any work done, but anyway, so thank you for that. Next item is also yours. It's case 21-00258 UT.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. So, as I have discussed, I think with all of you, or at least two of you, this might be best for just discussion today. I mean, the commission could take a vote if the commission wishes to do so, but there is time for discussion at future open meetings, because I realize this is a fairly long order and it's a rulemaking that we haven't previously discussed in any detail. I'm just throwing that out there. But I'll note that in terms of how many open meetings the commission has to consider this, the operative deadline is a deadline to have this any amendments to the order under this rulemaking published in the New Mexico Register. There's an 18-month period in the State Rules Act, the maximum period for adopting a rule pursuant to a notice of proposed rulemaking, or NOPR as they're called, and that 18 months expires on March 13th. And the last publication date is March 12th, and then has a submission date of February 29th. So that's a deadline for me to get it to the Mexico Register. I can have I've done a number of these, and if I have a week ahead of time to get everything to the New Mexico Register, I can easily do that. So I would say the last day the commission has last open meeting the commission has in order to that it can use to issue an order adopting any amendments would be the February 22nd open meeting, because that would still provide plenty of time for me to get it published. So, if the commission wants to have one or two or more open meetings to discuss this, there are to actually vote, there is time. For today, I think we can. I've talked to some of you about the major issues here. This is a limited. This is a rulemaking of limited scope, really just to deal with the 2021 amendments to the Rural Telecommunications Act, which are amendments that were part of bills, two of them at least. Well, there were two bills concerning, broader approaches to expanding broadband access in the state that go beyond the commission's broadband program, but that affect it. And one was the Connect New Mexico Act, establishing the Connect New Mexico Council that also amended the Rural Telecom Act to require the commission to adopt rules to coordinate the commission's actions with the Connect New Mexico Council. And then what was also passed was the Broadband Access and Expansion Act, which also which created the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion within NMDUIT, the Department of Information Technology. And it didn't amend the Rural Telecom Act, but the Rural Telecom Act also mentions in the amendments that were made with the other act that we have to coordinate not only the Connect New Mexico Council, but also with the statewide broadband plan that's issued by the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion. I'll call them OBAE. As you know, from this year's broadband application cycle, we've been coordinating even without an amended rule. We, as in the Telecommunications Bureau, and myself, have been talking to OBAE for over a year about how to coordinate. Last year was the first year there actually was a statewide broadband plan issued by OBAE, so it was the first year we really needed to coordinate there. And we did informally, and we sent all of our applications to OBAE. And as I previously noted in that case, the Connect New Mexico Council, this is very helpful. They do meet. They were meeting once a month. They're a very high level council that has, cabinet secretaries or their designees, legislative leaders or their designees, a lot of fairly high level people. And so they really have deferred to OBAE. I mean, they've done what they need to do under statute, but they understand they're not really going to be able to coordinate as well as OBAE, because OBAE works on this every day, and actually comes up with a plan and has hired a lot of staff to work on this. So we mostly go through OBAE. We've had contact with the council as well, but OBAE sort of does the overall coordination for both entities, which really makes a lot of sense. So we have been coordinating with them, but we hadn't updated our rule yet. And the statute actually requires that our rules state that we're going to coordinate in these ways with council and with OBAE and with a plan that's issued by OBAE. So, the proposed rule that was put out by the commission adopted staff's recommendations, which generally was more like incorporating the language of the statute into the rule. And then in addition to the two bills that were passed in 2021 regarding broadband access expansion, there was also an unrelated bill that was provided for a certain category of rural incumbent carriers, which only includes includes only one particular carrier, Sacred Wind Communications, a kind of support that is not identical to, but is similar to the access reduction support payments that the group of rural incumbent local exchange carriers has been receiving since 2006. So that was a separate type of bill that was passed the same year. And this the proposed rule would incorporate the parts of the amended RTA regarding that, so they'd be consistent with the amended statute. As I noted, we're already providing that support to Sacred Wind. The statute itself is very clear on how to calculate it and how to process the petition. We already received a petition, so this would just be getting the rule caught up with what we're already doing in that area as well. So I think essentially the comments we received, staff did initial comments, OBAE did initial comments, and Sacred Wind and I believe Smith Bagley did initial comments. I may be missing. I think that was it. And then the only response comments that we received were from Comcast, which provides broadband, cable broadband. And so I provided discussions of those comments, going through the portions of the rule that proposed changes, either proposed in our proposed rule or proposed by one of the commenters. OBAE, of course, has the most detailed comments, as you can see, because OBAE recommends changes to the commission's speed standards with regard to what areas will be considered underserved and unserved by broadband. So what areas are eligible to be considered, what areas, in other words, when applications come in, they can only be for areas that are within that definition. And OBAE actually has a lot of proposed changes there. And these are completely policy decisions for the commission. The Rural Telecom Act is not specific on when it comes to the broadband program. It gives a lot of leeway to the commission to decide what areas are most deserving. And I don't know if the commission wants to go into detail or ask me specific questions, but one of the most detailed parts of this order concerns OBAE's recommendations for changing the definitions of area unserved by broadband and area underserved to raise the speeds. I believe we have, in unserved, if at least 50% of the people in an area do not have at least 25.3, then it will be considered or maybe actually, no, I'm sorry, it's 10. We actually have a lower level for that. 10 download. That's 10 millibytes per second download, 1 millibytes per second upload. The OBAE would essentially expand the areas that are considered unserved by raising that to 25.3. So raising speeds with regard to these definitions actually expands the number, the number of different areas that could be considered unserved or underserved, because it places a higher standard in terms of the speeds that are already being provided. So it would be saying essentially, well, if you don't have at least 25.3 in that area, then we'll consider it unserved. And just with the underserved, it goes up from 10.1 to 25.3, but less than 120. So if an area that is served by 100 up, 100 down, 20 up would be considered, wouldn't be eligible, but anything up to that would be eligible for consideration, those areas. And they I don't know if maybe I want to stop right there and ask if the commission has any questions about this particular part, the first part regarding these definitions, because that's where a lot of the discussion is. OBAE has not only recommended increasing those speeds, but changing it from 50% to 80%, and also limiting it such that, and actually this would be expanding. This would again expand the areas that would be able to be considered. Is that an area that has fixed wireless would be, and only that would be considered unserved or underserved, because these definitions, as amended by OBAE, would require that the area have access to wireline-based broadband that provides these speeds. So an area that didn't have any wireline or didn't have enough, this particular level of wireline would be considered unserved and underserved, even if there was fixed wireless in place, towers that were providing similar speeds. So that's, OBAE sees that as part of, what should be considered minimum service. And
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. I'd say at this moment, it'd be worth it just to check in with the commission on your invitation at the beginning that we really have till March. So we've got the draft order, we've heard description of background, why it came together. What's your pleasure? Do you want to continue with this and try to vote on it today, or do we want to take another week or 2 weeks? I guess we could take another almost 6 weeks to look at this if you want to. I mean, the leavening factor on that is I would point out this docket was opened in 2021.
Yeah, I think there are very big implications, by the rulemaking. I do want to have a little bit of a conversation about it. To answer your question more directly, I would rather postpone this, especially because I do think it is important for us to discuss the implications of the changes that would or would not be adopted here. And in particular, things like, the whether there should be a requirement to have physical wires or not. I unfortunately we have limited funding. And I guess one thing that I would like to take more time to understand is how, well, I believe that having wire would, just naturally be more expensive if, you have to place the wire. And so how much would that limit our ability to reach certain residents who are in the most rural areas? And I guess I would, that's one thing that I have been thinking about since I saw this, and would appreciate more time to consider the, OBAE's proposals, and also, to see if you have any thoughts about that.
It sounds like your assessment's same as mine. When I read through it, one thing that sings out is this whole question of wired versus wireless, and I'd like to dig in a little deeper on that.
I would agree that postponing it would make sense. I mean, this is a lot to absorb, at least for me, and I honestly don't completely understand what changes are being made versus the status quo. And so I hesitate to vote on something that I don't fully understand. For me, it would be helpful to have a table of, this is the status quo and this is the proposal on this particular issue. And I understand that many of these changes are going to be driven by the change in legislation that triggered this, but some of these changes seem to be more discretionary, and those are the ones that I'd like to understand better.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in agreement, and I will move that we postpone this item to a future meeting.
I second.
Commissioner Allison,
All right.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, your motion to postpone adoption of an order in 21-00258 UT passes unanimously.
Great, thank you. Okay, so last item on the regular action agenda is case 23-00251. It's a P&M PPA approval request. We have a presentation from Mr. Martinez from Office of General Counsel. Take it away, Alder.
Good morning, Commissioners. This matter concerns P&M's application for a PPA and ESA under Commission Rule 551. P&M has proposed the PPA and ESA to meet the expanding electric needs of a data center in Los Lunas operated by a Meta platform subsidiary. And they propose to recover the costs of the PPA and ESA via several existing tariffs and a special services contract, which would be between P&M and the Meta subsidiary. Staff was the only other party to appear in this case, and they recommended approval of the PPA and ESA. What is before the Commission today is an order approving P&M's application by adopting the recommended decision of the hearing examiners. And unless the Commission has any questions now, what I was going to do is provide a little context for that final order by describing what the RD is doing and by extension, what the Commission has to do when it's considering this type of application. Okay.
Please proceed.
So I'm generally going to talk about that in two categories. The first is the Commission's general considerations when it assesses a PPA or ESA. And then I'm also going to talk about some aspects that are unique to this specific PPA ESA application. On that first category, the Commission, which is the general considerations for a PPA or ESA, the Commission has to address and assess whether the proposed agreements comply with subsection D of Commission Rule 551.8. And the way that the RD addresses that is discussing the evidence presented to support each of those requirements. The RD deems each of those requirements satisfied. In addition to that, as with any other PPA or ESA, the Commission has to determine whether the agreements are in the public interest. Similarly, the RD deems that requirement satisfied here as well. So that's the general considerations. In terms of what is unique about this application, under the special services contract between P&M and the Meta subsidiary, the Commission must also consider whether the PPA and ESA will result in no net adverse impact, and that's a term of art from the contract, to P&M's other customers. There are 3 points that we can draw from prior Commission precedent about what that requirement means. The first point is that the no net adverse impact is functionally an analysis of whether there's cross-subsidization of this data center by P&M's other customers. So that's the first point. The second point is that the Commission does not need to decide in this specific case, so in a case approving the PPA and ESA, whether the proposed tariffs have avoided this cross-subsidization. Instead, what the Commission can do is approve this PPA and ESA as long as it's proposed under a tariff structure that the Commission has previously determined is designed to approve no net adverse impact. And then the third point kind of follows from that last point, which is it's appropriate for the Commission to assess whether the no net adverse impact standard was in fact achieved via these tariffs at a later date. Often the most sensible time to do this is in P&M's next rate case. So just to bring back things to this present case, those 3 points are essentially what this RD is doing. It has approved the application with these tariffs and ordered that P&M demonstrate that it has achieved no net adverse impact in its next rate case or in the next year following the first year of commercial operations of these new resources. So for those reasons, I would recommend that the Commission approve the proposed final order adopting the RD, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, do you have any questions or discussion?
I do not have any questions. Thank you for, distilling the process and sort of the decision making that the Commission needs to do for this case. You put it so simply. I guess I would just say generally, I think I don't believe there was any disagreement throughout the case as to whether that process is acceptable and the correct one. I think the recommended decision in this case could have maybe not been as long on that. I think, I appreciate the thoroughness. But I think this was not a controversial case, and so I think we probably could have made that point in a more concise recommended decision. So that was all I wanted to offer.
I agree with that observation, and I also just wanted to personal privilege. That was an excellent presentation. So thank you.
I just, wanted to add, I'm in agreement with approving these resources. At the same time, I do think that this no net adverse impact is a complicated question. I do not believe it's been sufficiently addressed in the past. I think when we think about addressing it in rate cases, in principle, that makes sense. The problem is when you have a rate case like the last one, where you have an incredible number of issues, one more incredibly complicated issue sometimes just does not fit into the schedule, and therefore having some separate inquiry or process may be appropriate.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just to that last point, the RD lays out two potential avenues for considering this question next. So one would be in P&M's next rate case, and another would be in a separate proceeding following the completion of the first year of commercial operations. Presumably, if we're hearing it in a rate case before that other trigger, it would be a sooner filed rate case that didn't have the same degree of issues as the one we've just finished up with.
Yeah, I would just like to say I like that approach because if it's a separate proceeding to just talk about this issue, then everybody who needs to be involved in that proceeding has notice. If it would have been a surprise to take that up in a PPA approval case. And so again, I like this process. It's show me the info, and then if there's a hint of an issue there, then we can have a case that's properly noticed and everybody can be included. So I appreciate that part of the RD and the final order. Okay, I will move to adopt the final order proposed in this case.
A second.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion to approve the final order in 23-00251-UT passes unanimously.
Commissioners.
Well, I think we should take a break. It's funny because I'd had a conversation with Ms. Corey before this meeting, and we were like, how long is this meeting going to last? You just never know. Said if it takes 2 hours, it's her fault, but we haven't even got to her yet. So, so anyway, I'd say let's take a break and be back at 5 till.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we're back. Next item on the agenda, we're at discussion and potential action. We have a couple traditional first of the year documents that have been proposed by OGC, Mr. Cameron. So I'll ask you to describe the documents and where we're at in that process.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. So the two items that I propose the commission consider for approval are the a new Open Meetings Act policy and then also a new code of conduct. The Open Meetings Act policy pursuant to the Open Meetings Act is to be renewed annually. If you may recall, we did one in July. So we're a little ahead of schedule, but I think it's probably the commission's preference, and I guess maybe it would be mine as well, to kind of line all these things up at the beginning of the year, and that way we don't forget them. We don't have to try and remember in July, oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to be doing something here. So that's where the new OMA policy comes in. And then the code of conduct, that is something that was last done in 2021 by a previous commission. That technically doesn't have to be done again until next year. Again, attempting to line everything up, and given the fact that, you know, this is a different commission than the one that was here 3 years ago who approved that one. We had a discussion about putting together a new code of conduct. So I've done that as well. I'll get into more detail on this, but just to kind of set them both up briefly again, the new OMA resolution is very similar to the one we did in July. Few changes, but not a lot. The new code of conduct is very different than the one that was done by the previous commission. The previous commission one was much shorter, and the biggest difference, I think, is that the previous one referred to the commissioners abiding by all laws and statutes. In the version that is in front of you, those laws and statutes are actually called out and spelled out in the code of conduct, so that if an individual commissioner was wondering, well, I wonder if this violates a code or a statute or a law, it's right there in front of you. You don't have to go and find it yourself. So just trying to make it easier for you. With that, if you'd like, I could take these in order and we can go over the new Open Meetings Act resolution.
Yeah, I just, before you go on each one, I want to take the blame for this being on the agenda here. This meeting, again, I think you described it well. We've talked about it at previous meetings. It's nice to sync things up. And then the other item on the code of conduct is the three of us are going to celebrate graduating from ethics training next week. And so I just thought, since there isn't a code of conduct that I personally have committed to, now would be a nice time to do it. So thank you for bringing these to this meeting. And yeah, please go ahead, and unless there's other comments, opening comments or questions, start with the Open Meetings Act changes.
Okay. So in your binders, you have first a red line version of the changes that were made, and then secondly, a final version of the changes that were made. It doesn't include the red lines. So I suggest that we go to the final version. And I've actually made a couple of small changes to that since the one I posted up in Board Effect. I didn't do it again because I already had so many versions in there. I didn't want to complicate it any further, and I thought it was easier to just talk about it here. So I'm just going to go through this, and please, you know, either jump in with questions or we can talk about it once I get through it. On the first page, there's nothing was changed from the version that's in front of you. On the second page, I managed to figure out how to get that line out of the third sentence there. I left that in there just for Commissioner Aguilera's pleasure, just to keep him up last night, and I did figure out how to get it out of there. So, and then let's see, in section 3 on the second page, I think, although I don't see it on here, but I think that 72 hour, that looks kind of weirdly spaced. I think I figured out how to squeeze that back in. And then most importantly, I think, is at the bottom of the second page, there's a new number 7, and the title of that is closed meetings. And then it'll make more sense to you, because then when you go to the third page, A, B, C, and D fit under that heading of closed meetings. The reason I did that was I was not able to figure out how to renumber A, B, C, and D to make it 7, 8, 9, and 10. So my workaround, after much more time than I should have spent on it, I suppose, was to come up with a number 7, and somehow that worked. So there is a number 7 in the final version. That's it as far as any differences between what's in front of you and what I would propose you would adopt.
Mr. Cameron, can you, sorry, one clarification, is the new number 7 new language? Or
The new language is just a heading, essentially. It says closed meetings. So there's a number 7 closed meetings, and then A, B, C, and D.
I understand.
Follow
I'm
that,
following you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Cameron, in number 3 here, special meetings, could you please define what a special meeting is?
Commissioner Ellison, a special meeting is essentially not a regular meeting. It's the regular meetings are set up to happen bi-weekly on Thursdays. A special meeting is basically any other meeting that we have other than a closed meeting.
So it would be any not scheduled open meeting.
Correct.
Yeah, so I take that to mean it's like the workshops or like the P&M rate case
That's
meeting
right.
that we had, that type of meeting.
Would it be more clear to say unscheduled open meetings or additional open meetings?
We could, this is a section, much of this is taken verbatim from the Open Meetings Act. This section is not. And so, I mean, it's kind of an amalgam of what is required under the Open Meetings Act for meetings, and kind of adapted to what we do here, which is, 3 different types of meetings. So we could call it whatever you want.
And number 4, emergency meetings. Am I correct in assuming that these would also be called by a majority of the members in the same way that the open meetings are?
Commissioner Ellison, we could certainly say that. I mean, this is again another section. I mean, this part about emergency meetings is taken from the Open Meetings Act, but much like another part that I know we're going to discuss in a couple minutes about how to do a closed meeting outside of a open meeting, the Open Meetings Act is not specific as to how an emergency meeting gets called. So we can set that up however you would like.
Yeah, I think practically that would be impossible. Because, I mean, the reason for an emergency meeting is something happened. How do we vote if we're not in an open meeting?
Well, Mr. Chair, the special meetings section, I think that Commissioner Ellison is referring to, talks about being called by a majority of members. Doesn't necessarily say that it's being voted on by a majority of the members. But I hear what you're saying, and that was something that I was thinking of also, which is, well, if it's an emergency, maybe you can't get the majority. Maybe part of the emergency is all the phones went out or something. I don't know, right? So maybe a way to have a little bit of clarification, but also consider the fact that it would be an emergency is to say, emergency meetings will be called by a commissioner only under foreseen, and it would just require one commissioner to do it.
Yeah, so we did discuss this when we adopted this open meeting policy, and the initial draft said emergency meetings will be called on by the chairman, and my comment was If it's an emergency, maybe whoever OGC can reach out to first, should call the meeting. I don't think this says anything about votes or, having the quorum. I think for me, it was more about if it's an emergency, let's have the meeting. Obviously we hope to have, if we don't have a quorum at that meeting, well, that would be a problem. And then I think the solution was just to say, to delete, called on by the chair, and it ended up with this language that it will be called on only under unforeseen circumstances.
I'm a proponent of, making things clear. So if, we want to say will be, can be called by any individual commissioner, or if we want to say that, with the agreement of two commissioners, understanding that we wouldn't be assembling for a vote. I mean, either way would be fine with me, but I would lean towards preferring it be spelled out.
I think that would be a good clarification. If we say emergency meetings will be called on by any single commissioner, obviously, I'm having a hard time thinking about what would happen that we would need an emergency meeting, and hopefully we don't need one.
I can give you an example that hopefully never happens again, but Chair's Council breakfast at a NARUC meeting that a former New Jersey commissioner was talking about September 11th. And so I kind of think that we can spend a lot of time debating about emergency meetings, but if we need one, it'll be self-evident. And so the process isn't that important.
So I think either a majority or a single. I prefer single just because I feel like if it's an emergency, the earlier we can provide notice of the meeting, the better. The action would still require a majority, or not a majority, but well, I guess technically, yes, a majority here.
Yeah, I would prefer that by any single commissioner language as well, and understanding that these things are going to be extremely unlikely, but we're talking about it, and let's go ahead and clarify it is my view. And when we're looking at closed meetings, your number 7, it does state that if we want to break out of an open meeting and have a closed meeting, that there has to be a majority vote. However, there is no clarification of the procedure if it's outside of an open meeting. Say if one of us felt that we need to have a closed deliberative session on some topic ahead of the next meeting, this does not clarify the procedure. B says that the commission may conduct closed meetings as needed. How is it determined that it's needed? I would again say here that any single commissioner can call a closed meeting, just to make it clear.
Commissioner, this is another place where the language for this section for 7B, closed meetings B, which is about the closed meetings that are outside of an open meeting. It's another place where the Open Meetings Act is just basically doesn't say anything about it. It talks about how to provide the notice and what you have to do, things like that, but doesn't talk about how to actually call the closed meeting. The practice of this commission since I've been here has been, basically somebody calls for a closed meeting and we try and get it scheduled and we get everybody together and figure out people's schedules and it just happens. Just to clarify for the purposes of your consideration of this section, there's nothing in the Open Meetings Act that says how to do this. So that's why it's written like this. I mean, this is cut and pasted out of the act. I think we could add something in there if we wanted to, and that wouldn't be a problem.
Again, I guess while we're doing this exercise and we're reviewing our meetings policy, I would certainly lean towards clarifying the process. I think it would be quite a simple insertion, and it would clarify the process in my mind.
Yeah, I don't think there's disagreement that clarity is good. Do you have a proposal?
I do. I would say, I would modify B to say that after the first sentence, maybe to say any single commissioner may call for an open meeting, or I'm sorry, may call for a closed meeting.
I guess just sort of taking this to an extreme. I'm just thinking about, what this would imply. Does then that imply then that the other two commissioners need to come to that meeting? As opposed to a closed meeting being called by a majority of the commission.
I would be equally happy with that formulation. I'm just thinking about, again, if we're thinking about having to take a vote, then I think the timing wouldn't work out very often if, let's just say, I felt like we need a deliberative session next week about a topic that's coming up on the following open meeting. Well, we obviously wouldn't be together to take a vote, and so we couldn't have that meeting unless we would agree that it didn't require a vote, it just required the consent of two of us. And I would be equally fine with that language.
Right, and just to clarify, you're talking about a vote as to whether to have a meeting, because
Whether to have a meeting or not, because
I just want to clarify so people
right.
don't think that
No,
we're talking about a vote
as to whether to have the meeting, because if we say we can't decide on a deliberative session unless we're in open meeting, then that's a pretty big constraint on holding deliberative sessions.
Right. Yeah, that works for me. I appreciate that both of you are reasonable, and the extreme that I'm sort of thinking about is not an actual thing that I have to worry about. So thank you for that. Whatever way fixes it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding the proposal is just writing down what we're doing right now, so I think that's valuable. And then if somebody does have a wild hair, the value of recognizing it's not a closed meeting without a quorum is the other two can vote with their feet.
Yeah. So the commission may conduct closed sessions as, can you say again, Commissioner Allison, what the edit was?
Well, I would just, I'm just off the cuff here, I would just add a sentence after that first sentence in B and say that, such meetings may be called with the consent of two members of the commission. Maybe Mr. Cameron has a better way to put that.
Yeah. As I'm thinking about it, I think it could also just be a single commissioner, because if a single commissioner calls one and nobody else shows up, then it's not a closed meeting. So.
Sure, I would be fine with that.
Yeah, this is fundamentally about OMA. If there
Yeah.
isn't a quorum, there is no question.
Yeah, the original proposal by Commissioner Ellison was to insert a second sentence in that section 7B that said any single commissioner may call for a closed meeting.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the way to do it.
Okay, so then were there any other edits you wanted to make? No.
The only other question, Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt you, was we originally started this discussion with Commissioner Ellison's question about number 3 and special meetings and whether we should call them something different. I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, my understanding is this is a term that's used in OMA, right?
It's not actually.
No,
Yeah.
no, but it is a term that has been used in prior resolutions
That's
adopted
true.
by this commission.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, by this agency. That's what I mean.
I guess I would prefer to map what we call our meetings to OMA, so it makes it easier to comply. Go forward.
And I guess the concern I have with the term special meeting is it doesn't tell me whether it's an open meeting or a closed meeting or, exactly, it's a special meeting. So maybe there's another term, or maybe there's a term in OMA. To me, it's just not clear.
Yeah, I guess my point is there's plenty of categories of meetings in OMA. We don't need to create another one. So is there any value of that paragraph as it is? Could you just delete the whole thing?
I think we could also just call it open meetings may be called on by,
Yeah,
and with that.
Right.
yeah, and so that gives us opportunity to have a 72-hour noticed
Yeah.
open meeting outside of the bi-weekly schedule. Okay, there's value there.
Right. Can we say open meetings outside of the biweekly scheduled meetings or outside of the scheduled meetings or?
Yep.
So I was gonna say, we've got quite a few edits now, and again, there wasn't a deadline on this, just first of the year stuff, so maybe produce another draft for the next meeting that incorporates what you think you heard from us, because
I think I got it. I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Chair.
or is that okay with everybody, or are you ready? So then next on the list is the code of conduct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see. Similarly to the Open Meetings Act policy, your binder has 2 versions of the code of conduct, one red and green lined. And it seems that Word enjoys some Christmas there. And then one that is a final version. And similarly to the OMA that we just talked about, I have made a couple of small changes to that final version since the time that I posted it in Board Effect, and I'd be happy to go through those. And then again, just as background, this is a an update essentially of the commission code of conduct. The last one was in 2021. Obviously, there was a different commitment, completely different commission here. Back then, this is supposed to be updated every 4 years, so we're a little ahead of schedule, but with the new commission, thought it was a good idea to go ahead and do that. So the two changes that were made in here since I posted it, on the first page, Commissioner Ellison pointed out to me that right at the very beginning, it says, whereas this duly elected body, and you are not an elected body anymore. So I changed that word to appointed. So now it says, whereas this duly appointed body. And then on that same page in number 3, down at the bottom of the page under therefore be it resolved, at Commissioner Ellison's request, I removed where it says at the end of that part, it says conduct themselves in a manner that justifies the confidence placed in them. I took out by the people. Again, that seems to refer to the elected body that you are no longer a part of. I think that's it as far as any changes I made since the version that you have in front of you was posted in Board Effects. So that is the final version for you to consider. The other thing I would note, I suppose, is at Commissioner Aguilera's request, there are citations in there to tell you where the different sections of this came from. And those are primarily the Governmental Conduct Act, the Gift Act, the Public Regulation Commission Act, and then there is one other section there that comes out of the Personnel Act.
Yeah, I understand those changes. I guess I have no problem with leaving by the people in there, but I think that's true whether it's there or not, so.
It's not a principal concern of mine.
And I do appreciate the more detail.
Mr. Cameron, can you point me again to the version of Word Effect that I should be looking at? I just, I'm looking at one that didn't have the ex parte rules, and so it might be an old one.
Well, the one that you have in front of you, Commissioner Aguilera, is the printed one is the most recent one, is the final one. With those two small changes that I made that are not in Board Effect. And I think what you are referring to, the reference to the ex parte rules, comes from the our rule about the Commission Code of Conduct, which directs us to adopt a code of conduct, and then says we shall adopt it unless the commission shall adopt a code of conduct pursuant to a section of the Governmental Conduct Act, unless it's inconsistent with, and it lists off 3 old sections of the PRCA, and one of those sections is the ex parte rule.
Okay, yes, I see it now. It's in the section B, and it was sort of combined.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay, commissioners, do you feel sufficiently prepared on this one to vote? Then I'll move that we adopt the proposed code of conduct.
Second.
Commissioner Aguilera,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, your motion to approve the resolution 01-11-24, which is the 2024 Commission Code of Conduct, passes unanimously.
And then one grace note on that was I was asking if we could actually sign this one. So I don't, or is that still the plan or? I mean, that I actually use my fingers to sign it rather.
We could certainly do
Yeah,
that.
right.
Let me make that change and get a clean printed copy to everybody. And
Okay, great.
Sure,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, and just for clarity, for the last year, we've been operating under what was implemented before. So we just carried over what the other commission before us had signed. And so that's what the code of conduct that we had adopted for the last year. And this one is, I guess, like a new version. Thank you.
I think that's correct.
Okay, again, thank you. Next item on the agenda, and actually next three are presentations by Chief of Staff Troy Corey. So I ask if he could actually move to the room, the front here. And first is NOI on community solar. So I asked Ms. Corey to give us a presentation on that to put it in context with lots of other things that are going on currently with community solar.
Good morning, commissioners. So this agenda item is, I think I was asked to present this because there's a lot of other things going on with community solar. And also I have been mentioning this when we talk about rulemaking priorities for several months now, if not most of the time when I talk about our rulemaking priorities. So just as an initial statement, this is not actually a rulemaking. This is more of an inquiry to find out what we don't know. You've heard me refer to it in the past as a lessons learned docket, inviting industry participants, anybody really who has experiences learned from this first round of community solar that they want to share with us, things that we could do better, things that maybe we don't know. And so you'll see that this is a very short order. It asks two simple questions that are what I think fairly open-ended, really looking for input into the inquiry that our rule requires us to issue in February before the April 1st deadline. So what should we think about as we draft those specific questions? And then the second question being, what other things should we know as we go forward through the administration of community solar and as we look towards the next steps? So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Yeah, so thank you for that. One of the conversations we had when we were putting it on the agenda was, I think we knew for sure that we were going to do a NOPR on community solar. And I know like Mr. O'Donnell's been collecting items that he's expecting to propose in a NOPR setting. So my understanding is this NOI is a way to just collect things in addition to what Mr. O'Donnell's been working on before we do the NOPR that we're expecting to do. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. As we've talked about in these meetings before, when we talk about the rulemaking priorities and community solar, there's probably a lot of information out there that maybe doesn't fit directly into a NOPR or a rule, but it's worth knowing both from an administrative side and as we go forward, eyes wide open.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I add a note?
The voice from above. Yeah, Mr. Fisk, go ahead.
I just like to note that there are actually two big processes that we will have to conduct this year under the Community Solar Act. One is a rulemaking. And in our rule, our community solar rule, we've actually set a date, an internal deadline of April 1st to begin that rulemaking. And I think this information that's being requested is definitely something that will be helpful in formulating a proposed rule That's what needs to go out by April 1st is a order issuing a notice of proposed rule and a proposed rule. So I think gathering information for that is important. And then we have to have a new rule in place effective by November 1st. The only actual requirement in the act is that we set a new statewide cap by September 1st, but November 1st. But we have to do that via rulemaking because we've done that via rulemaking originally. Well, we adopted a cap that we had to adopt or as per the act. But anyway, that won't be the only thing we do in the rulemaking. That's why we're gathering this information from participants so that we can have a good proposed rule. Then we'll also get formal comments from participants, utilities, et cetera, to come up with a rule to be in place by November 1st. But there's also the same deadlines for a big report to the legislature, and we'll have to gather information for that. And I think it may be that Troy was referring to that when she said a February deadline, because we've set ourselves in our rule a deadline of 45 days before April 1st to begin collecting information that we need to provide to the legislature in that report. So it's a very detailed report. That report is not due until November 1st, but our rule, we've set ourselves an early deadline to start collecting that. So there's basically two areas of information we need to start collecting right away. And I think we're getting a good start on it. I just wanted to point out that these two things will be running sort of in tandem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fisk. That was kind of my understanding is this will be complementary to what we're doing and beneficial because it's just making sure people are aware of it and providing a vehicle for participation.
And just to know, Incline, our program administrator, has been keeping a very long list of things to consider for both proceedings as well. And they're going to provide that to us soon.
Great, thank you.
I guess I would ask for some further clarification because I understood initially that this is an NOI for the information we need to request to help inform the information we need to request in February, but not the notice of intent that leads to a rulemaking. Can you please just clarify that? Because I understand that there are two separate things. Can you clarify whether this is the NOI that would lead to an NOPR?
Thank you, Commissioner Aguilera. No, this is not the NOI that would lead to a NOPR. My understanding, and I will say, this order was drafted by your council and not by me. But the idea of this is to help us start the conversations, help us figure out what we need as we move forward with administration. Maybe it informs that NOI that leads to the rulemaking, but also maybe there are things in there that we just need to know generally. And so this is a place to collect a catch-all.
Okay, thank you. If for the NOPR that leads to a rulemaking, I do think it would be beneficial to start with like a notice of intent. This maybe is a notice of inquiry, but a notice of intent that would help develop the NOPR. I think this is an opportunity to get a lot of ideas before we issue our own ideas in the NOPR.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree with you for what it's worth and hope that that your general counsel is taking these notes.
I do have a question about this. Would this be the inquiry be limited to the two questions that are listed here? Or, could there be additional questions or a workshop or?
Commissioner Ellison, I believe the way that the rules work, and I'll defer to your general counsel, is that the inquiry would be limited to these questions. Now, I do believe the intent or no per that Commissioner Aguilera is referring to would have all of those other steps, other questions, workshop, et cetera. But as we discussed over the last, summer, fall and winter, this would be a place for stakeholders, many of whom we've heard from that have strong opinions to essentially tell us what they think.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I'd just like to know, I haven't seen this notice of inquiry. I did not draft it, but I was aware that I believe Arthur O'Donnell and Choi and possibly the chairman have been working on this. I'd like to be, get more involved so we can coordinate this. We're kind of at an early stage, but we will work on coordinating this so that it's we're not duplicating efforts, but we're making all the efforts that we need for both proceedings and getting them out on time.
Any other questions or discussion?
I did want to mention that, I know the solar bill credit and the whether or not, transmission charges are, in or out are some pretty important questions. Would this allow for would this allow flexibility for those types of questions to be discussed?
Commissioner, it's your order, so I imagine you could add those questions if you wanted to be that specific in this.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the first bullet, it's pretty broad.
And just to note, I think Commissioner Allison is aware of this, but Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, that that the appeal, there is an appeal of the rule currently pending, and that's one of the major issues that was raised by SPS and the other utilities, is our rules inclusion of a provision stating that transmission costs shall not be deducted from the solar bill credit. I'm not sure exactly where that appeal stands at this point. And of course, we have Aaron is handling our appeals. We may have a decision, that comes in sometime during this year, or we may not. So that's a big part of that issue.
I would personally like to hear from the parties on that particular issue. So, I'm okay with leaving it broad like this. I also think it would be fine to include that particular question.
Given the interest that's being expressed in particular questions, as well as the relation to a notice of intent with respect to the rulemaking, would it be advisable to issue at the next meeting having additional feedback, or was the February 8th date solid enough that the commission wants to hold this order as it stands?
Again, if you read this, it's very broad, so I don't think there's a intent to be that specific. It was to open a channel of communication complementary to the other things and get that channel open now.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just note, it sounds to me like, again, I wasn't actually involved in preparing this notice of inquiry, but it sounds like this notice of inquiry is aimed at the rulemaking, getting, recommendations and input for the rulemaking. I think we will do a step that is not subject to that February deadline, though we'll want to get it done get responses by early March so that we can then issue a NOPR before the end of the month in March and meet our own internal rule deadline. And then when it comes to requesting information as per the report, the act, that is where we set ourselves a mid-February deadline in our rule. And we will be we can send out a request for exactly the information, categories of information that are mentioned in the act. So that will be that'll be a different kind of request, because they'll just be requesting categories of particular types of information and not any recommendations or input, which will be in the rulemaking.
Thank you. Commissioners, you got any more questions, comments? And I'll move to adopt this order initiating inquiry on the community solar program.
I second.
Mr. Cameron?
Commissioner Ellison?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell?
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilar?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, your motion passes.
Great, thank you. So next item is a legislative update. Legislature starts Tuesday of next week. And so we have our legislative director, Colin Gillespie, and Chief of Staff, Troy Corey, to give us an update on what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. A couple of updates. The session will officially start opening day on Tuesday. We'll have the state of the state from the governor. I also want to remind everyone that on the 18th, that's Thursday, we'll have the House Appropriations and Finance Committee hearing for the PRC. It's scheduled at 3 p.m. in room 307. But we're anticipating showing up, between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, just in case things run quickly over there. We have several pieces of legislation to update the commission. On the House side, last time we discussed clean transportation fuels, the electric school bus, low-income solar. In addition to those bills, there's now an energy storage system income tax credit that's sponsored by Sarniana. That's pre-filed. It's HB 73, and that would provide an energy storage system income tax credit for taxpayers who purchase and install energy storage systems on that taxpayer's residential, agricultural, industrial property. The maximum credits are $5,000 for residential and $150,000 for commercial, industrial, or agricultural property. There's also HB 76. It's called Restrict Zero Emission Vehicle Rules, sponsored by Townsend, Scott, and Montoya. This would restrict the Environmental Improvement Board from adopting or continuing in effect a rule that requires a manufacturer to produce or deliver for sale a certain percentage of zero emission vehicles. We also have a couple of geothermal bills on the House side. HB 91, Geothermal Resources, sponsored by Caballero, directs the Energy Conservation and Management Division of MNERD to administer laws and rules related to geothermal resources and geothermal projects. HB 92, same sponsor, it's called Geothermal Electricity. It provides for a geothermal electricity generation income tax credit. We have a couple of what I would call tangential bills on the House side. House Joint Resolution 2 would eliminate pocket vetoes. That would just change the legislative process, as it were. There's an environmental rights constitutional amendment sponsored by Ferrari. This would enshrine environmental rights for New Mexicans, including air and water quality. And then there's also a session length House Joint Resolution number 1 that's sponsored by Matthew McQueen. And it appears to limit the legislative period to 45 days for both odd and even number years. On the Senate side, there's a similar bill. It's sponsored by Lopez, and it would mandate 60-day sessions for both even and odd years. As a reminder, on the Senate side, they are not numbering bills during the pre-filing process, but once opening day happens on Tuesday, those bills will start to be assigned Senate bill numbers. For now, those can be accessed via the NM Legis website. There is a banner there with a picture, scrolling banner. It allows you to access Senate legislation through that link. Also on the Senate side, we have geothermal heat pump tax credits. So that's a geothermal system in combination with heat pumps, sponsored by William Sewells. We also have a geothermal resources bill sponsored by Ortiz y Pino. It would amend the duties of Conservation and Management Division of MNERD. It would create a geothermal projects development fund. It would authorize grants, and it would create a revolving loan fund as well. In addition, Ortiz y Pino is sponsoring a geothermal tax credit bill that would just create a geothermal electricity generation income tax credit. There's another tax credit bill sponsored by Senator Tallman. It's an electric vehicle income tax credit. I'm currently checking to see if that's related to last year's electric vehicle income tax credit. We have the low income solar bill sponsored by Senator Hamblin. This was 2023's House Bill 432. It would enact a low income solar, and it would require equitable distribution of benefits of on-site solar generated energy generated on affordable housing. There's a multi-family component to that bill, multi-family housing component to that bill. On the telecom side, Senator Padilla is sponsoring 2 bills, both related to pole attachment. This is in concert with the Office of Broadband Access Expansion. The second of those bills, I think we discussed this last 2 weeks ago, but the second of those bills would just provide for easements. It would allow for easements to help regulate those pole attachments. On the what I would consider tangential side, there's also a bill that's similar to Matthew McQueen's that would limit the session length to 45 days. Again, no bill number for that, but that has been pre-filed. And then something that would impact, looks like all employees, private or public at the state level. There is a Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. And I think that's sponsored by Chandler and Stewart. And it just looks like a bill that would provide for paid medical leave, expand maternity leave rights. And that's all I have in terms of legislative updates. These are accessible in a legislative session folder that's on the intranet. The spreadsheet tracker is also in your inboxes. And I'll be updating that very frequently. I also wanted to update the commission. We're also having a meeting on the FIR process today. And I wanted to again just acknowledge the individuals that have really helped out in that effort. Brad Borman, Jason Montoya, Ed Rilkoff, and I'm probably forgetting some, but just want to thank them for their ongoing help in designing and tweaking that process. 24-hour FIR request turnaround time will begin on Tuesday. It'll be all hands on deck for that. And just a reminder, to staff that, when you receive an FIR request, it should become your top priority. That's all I have, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. You have any? Nope. No.
I appreciate the updates as well. And thank you. No questions.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to handicap anything. So. I know you're a gambling man, but so this is a two-part presentation. We also have a piece from Chief of Staff Joy Akoli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to go over, we got the executive and the LFC budget recommendations late last week. A brief recap of what we asked for. We asked for a base operating budget of approximately 12.1 million, as well as a supplemental to cover our FY24, the fiscal year that we are currently in, 200s category budget. So that's the personnel category. As you remember, we were projected to be short in FY24. So we asked for a supplemental to cover that. We also asked for a large expansion of 24 positions, 10 being for our pipeline safety, which are federally funded along with other state funds, and 14 general funded positions. And then we asked for various non-recurring special appropriations, including 2.5 million for a technology upgrade. Other special appropriations include money to cover lawsuit judgment, money to cover pipeline safety trucks that match the expansion request there, and money to facilitate the move into the ERB building. So the executive, well, let me talk about where both the executive and LFC agree. The both recommendations fully support our base operating budget. So if you remember, we built that with increased eye towards training, travel, and staff professional development. So we have support from both the executive and the LFC on that. We also got support from both the executive and the LFC on the pipeline safety expansion positions. So all 10 positions that we requested there were granted to us, as well as the special appropriation for the pipeline safety trucks to put those new pipeline safety positions into pipeline safety trucks. So both recommendations agree on that. The executive recommendation supports a $2 million special appropriation for IT upgrades, as well as the litigation costs. But it does not, support the move to the ERB building. We can talk about that in a second. And I should also say that both recommendations support a supplemental for our 200 category to get us through the end of FY24. There's a difference in that, likely due to the moment in time where they pulled the projections. The LFC recommendation, and the executive recommendation includes no other general funded expansion positions. The LFC recommendation includes besides the stuff that they agree with the executive on, it also includes a position in the utilities division for compliance manager. That is the one expansion general funded position that they have recommended. They've recommended 500,000 for IT modernization, as well as some of the costs related to the lawsuit. And they have also included the costs for the move to the new to the new building. Both recommendations include, and this is not specific to the PRC, but both recommendations include a raise for state employees. The executive has recommended a 3% raise. The LFC has recommended a 4% raise in two different buckets, so to speak, 2% across the board for a cost of living adjustment, as well as a 2% raise available to states to ensure appropriate placement of employees. So it would give agencies a chance to look at their employees and make sure parity is the order of the day. So as Colin mentioned, our hearing in front of the House Appropriation and Finance Committee, is January 18th, where we will hear from our analysts, and they will explain to the committee the differences and where they fell, and we will also have an opportunity to address the committee then. And then it's off to the races.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioners, you got any questions or?
I try to clarify, Ms. Curry, the proposal with the IT upgrades and no building moving expenses, was that the LFC proposal?
Commissioner Ellison, that was actually the executive proposal. And since you asked, thank you for asking, by the way, that reminds me, so far, it is my understanding that the ERB has not broken ground on their new building, and I don't want to be, I might have this wrong, but I think the plan is March for that, which means we were thinking of next summer for the move. If all goes well, we're probably looking at next fall then, assuming there's no hiccups in the building process, because they have to build their building, they have to move. We have to work with GSD in getting it refurbished for our needs, and then we will move. So it's very likely now that the move won't be happening until next fall, which is a whole different fiscal year.
Well, I thought we were talking 2025. So next fall is October 2024.
No, I'm sorry. When I say next, I mean next calendar year. So I'm thinking we were talking about June, July, August of 2025 initially, and I'm thinking we're probably talking about September, October, November of 2025.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the updates. I don't have any questions.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks, probably, Mr. Gillespie. Okay, so next item is again, Chief Staff Communications. There's an item on the agenda, which was the implementation plans from the strategic implementation items from a strategic plan. And then this is an open forum if you've got any other questions you want to ask Chief of Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, trying very hard not to last 2 hours up here. As you said, it would be my fault. So I wanted to just update you on where we are. As when we left the strategic plan, our facilitator, Mr. Bennett, had talked with you all about what the next steps were. The next steps were we would get staff members to look at the strategic goals, provide me some recommendations for what it would take to implement. They have done that. I have taken those, I have consolidated them. We have seen some repeat ideas. So it was really interesting. We saw implementation suggestions show up in multiple of the in multiple of the strategic goals. So in those cases, we consolidated assigned duties, et cetera. I'm meeting with executive staff next week to fine tune those. But what became apparent is, and I think based on discussions with each of you, this isn't just like a staff thing. This is an everybody all hands on deck thing, including the commissioners. And so there's a couple of items that I would like to ask for volunteers on. You don't have to decide today, and we can talk more about all of the implementation items, you know, at your interest. I don't want to go over all of them because there are 69 of them, which means this is just year one implementation goals. So we have approximately, what is that, 1.3 a week over the next year from now until December 31st of next year to get done. So yeah, we got it. A couple of places that I selected as maybe highlighting for you to think about volunteering. The first one I'm going to highlight is under the goal of providing more opportunities for training, development, recognition, and advancement. One of the ideas, several of the ideas, was to identify more leadership opportunities within the agency. Since that is a multi-pronged task and more brains and eyes are better at spotting those than fewer, my suggestion is that we implement a committee to specifically brainstorm ways to do that. And so I would very much appreciate a commissioner being on that committee. For obvious reasons, if any two of you are on that same committee, now we have all kinds of other administrative issues. So that's right. That's the first place, particularly I wanted to ask for a volunteer. And I don't know how you would like to do this, commissioners, if you want me to pause after these solicitations and let discussion happen, or if you just want me to go through and we can talk about them in whole.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear him to see if you're saving the best for last.
Ooh. So the next one is the divisions. Each division will implement or create 4 of their own performance measures. The commission, the Office of Commissioners, is a division. And so I think it would be it would be a good exercise for the commissioners to create their performance measures for their office. And for those who are watching who want to get into the details of organizational structure at the PRC, the Office of the Commissioners include the commissioners yourselves, as well as your technical advisors and your assistant, Jennifer Baca. It also includes the analysts, of which we just hired 1 of 2. So my suggestion would be work with your general counsel on how best to do that, since probably the 3 of you do need to collaborate on that. The next request for volunteers is for a point person from the commission to sit with another committee to create an agency-wide procedural schedule that allows for refined planning of caseload and other statutory and other duties, so that staff can plan time off and actually have that time off respected, because that's one of the feedback items that we got, is sometimes that's not respected because of the flow of cases. And so somebody who likes looking at calendars is probably the best person for that committee. Another, and I think this is the last one. Yes. The last volunteer that I would ask for is a volunteer to work on a committee to hold and plan, organize, and hold monthly lunch and learns. Not necessarily just within the agency, but frankly, anyone who has an interest in PRC or utility matters. That came up in various different places of the implementation, or excuse me, of the strategic goals. It showed up under multiples of them. And so this to me is a high priority and would benefit from a commissioner being on that committee. These, I have 2 more, and they're not necessarily a volunteer. It is more of a heads up, please provide feedback, is one of our goals is to adopt processes that encourage accountability, self-evaluation, and continuous improvement. Of those, there is 2 different action items. One is to implement a judicial standards like annual review survey for commissioners, OGC, and hearing examiners. The other piece of that is to determine and implement a review process for the other side of the agency, the advocacy staff. And so those are works in progress. And as you think about what that might look like, I could very much welcome your assistance on that. So now I stand for questions, and I am happy to go over any other of the 69 items that are on this list.
I guess when the list is ready, I'd just be interested to see it. Not that I want to volunteer for more than what you've offered here. And then I don't know, I don't want to step on other people's priorities, so that's why I'm hesitant to jump up and volunteer for this, but I'm in for whatever you need help with. So if you've got other commissioners saying, hey, I really want to do this one, please assign them that. And I don't, like I say, I think we're just hearing this for the first time. It makes sense to me that, hey, let's come back and report out in 2 weeks what the assignments are.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Maybe just having like a short blurb of, each of the ones. I forgot my pen today, so I didn't write them down. But I think that would be helpful. And, like the chair just said, I'm certainly happy to help and just want to think about where I could maybe be the most help and not necessarily be a limitation to the committee. So.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I do plan on circulating this. This is all, as Mr. Bennett said, this is a living document. And so it's a work in progress, even to the point of like a short blurb on what the committee is going to do. Well, let's get the committee together and then write that short blurb. That's how much of a work in progress it is. I did want to make sure that we're talking about this so that we are making progress, because it's a very ambitious set of action items. More than 60 in a year is no joke. But when I meet with our division directors and executive staff next week, we're going to be hammering out some of the down and dirty details. And so we will certainly update you as that goes along.
And I would just say I'm happy to volunteer for one of these and agree that it makes sense to get a little more information, think about it, and make a decision next time. The key performance indicators for the commissioners division sounds very tricky, and I suspect that all 3 of us are going to need to contribute to some thinking around that.
Commissioner, it sounds like fun for OGC.
By contrast, eating lunch sounds easy.
So if there are no other questions on the implementation plan, I just wanted to run through kind of the happenings of the agency. It's been a little while since we've done that. All right. So again, just trying to not take up the time that Commissioner O'Connell threatened for me. So first and foremost, as you know, we have a new CRD director. He's hit the ground running. Since December 1, the division has seen 76 complaints and has been working through handling those. And also a new renewed initiative is that CRD will be meeting with each of the utilities on a quarterly basis to facilitate a working relationship and help move these complaints through the process. So that will be started, as I understand, some are already scheduled and more are yet to be scheduled. As far as transportation division goes, as you know, they are in full swing trying to get things in order to move over to the Department of Transportation. And that includes working through eDocket and trying to clean up their entries. Everything from typos to as some of the dockets that you've seen requested to be open from them. And so they're really doing a great job trying to get through that and trying to make that transition clean. In December 2023, the Compliance Bureau handled 6 complaints, 160 annual reports, and 4 investigations. And the Applications Bureau handled issued 6 warrants and 2 certificates for non-emergency medical transportation. Speaking of being in full swing, our Utilities Division is hopping. That's my word, not theirs. Ed wouldn't want to be attributed that word. They're working on many, many cases with the Accounting Bureau, dealing with things from the New Mexico Gas Company rate case to SPS's CCN, to transportation cases, the fuel clause cases, several co-op rate increases and advice notices. The Economics Bureau has 3 RPS cases that they're working on, 3 energy efficiency cases, 2 transportation electrification cases. I can't read my scribble. 4 sets of testimony in community solar cases over the last 6 months, 2 CCNs, 1 PPA, 1 financing case, and 2 rate cases. The Engineering Bureau, as you know, has been spinning up because we have 2 new engineers in that bureau, bringing the total to 3. Shout out for any engineers who might want to come in and be our bureau chief, because there's 1 more position in there. But they've been spinning up and they're working on the rate case, a grid mod case, a location approval case, and an abandonment case there. The Telecoms Bureau has also been working very hard on reviewing the SRUSF project reports, and the ETC designation relinquishments and reclassifications. Last but not least, ASD budget. You heard enough from me on that. Also, as part of the transportation transition, our records team has been going through old boxes and boxes and boxes of old cases, divvying out the transportation cases and trying to get DOT to take them so that we're no longer responsible for those records. And then last but not least, IT has been working with DoIT on a security penetration test for the agency. And that's a statewide security test that DoIT is implementing, and Miguel and team has been doing a great job working with them on that. So if there aren't any other questions, I think I got through in record time.
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Curry. I did have one sort of comment on the consumer relations department. I've heard the rule of thumb that for every 1 customer that pursues a formal complaint, you've got another 20 with the same problem that just didn't complain. And you know, I just wanted to plant a seed and see if we could think about, in addition to responding to the issues, think about analyzing, you know, the kind of complaints that we're getting so that we could get information in terms of, you know, maybe what rules ought to be clarified.
Commissioner Ellison, I think that's a fabulous idea. At the next meeting, one of the agenda request items from me will be to have our consumer relations director present to you kind of the contours of the complaints that we saw in 2023. So what kind of complaints did we see more of? Where were those complaints, i.e. what utility or what co-op? I also, as you will see when you get a chance to glance at the implementation plan, there is a desire amongst staff also to understand where the complaints are and what do those trends look like. So one of the action items under the implementation plan is a monthly newsletter. And hopefully we will start seeing those that complaint report in that monthly newsletter. So we're not waiting for the end of a quarter or the end of a year to get that trend report.
Yeah, that's all great. And then just, this was my first meeting of this new year. And so just been spending some time over the break thinking about what a year ago looked like versus what now looks like. And, you know, we talked about earlier in the meeting, this is a big change in terms of the top of the agency, but it was a big change for the whole agency. You know, dealing with us was also a change for something everybody had to do. And so, you know, we came in, we've got different ideas. We wanted things to be different than they were, wanted to build on the strengths of the dedicated folks who have been here for a very long time. We also had a lot of vacancies. So we've got a fresh group of new folks here. So that's all exciting. But I just wanted to thank you personally, because a lot of the changes we wanted to see just weren't happening until you got here. So appreciate that. And then something you've been able to do, especially we're going to see the benefit of it in this next month, is helping the three of us navigate state government. I mean, none of us have worked in state government. It is different than anything we'd ever experienced. So that's another thing that you brought to the table. And then just the thing you just went through, what's going on in the agency and this implementation plan. I think one of the biggest, your personal strength and something you've done that helps this implementation of change is through saying, hey, we need a new strategic plan. Let's take that plan all the way through down to implementation plans. Commissioners aren't immune from being accountable for making the things that we want to see happen. So that drives both accountability and growth in the agency. So that's a lot to have happened in the first year. So I'm afraid that some, you know, change is hard. And so as we move forward, we're going to see different manifestations of that. But I just wanted to share with you and whoever else in the agency is watching that I really appreciate your efforts over this past year. And, you know, I apologize for using this term. One of my new terms is transaction costs, right? We were trying to do it ourselves until you got here. It wasn't happening, and it was impossible to do everything that needs to be done while respecting the fact that my primary job here is to vote on the stuff that we're voting on. So tremendous amount of progress there. And so thank you for leading the agency through this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I certainly want to echo those sentiments, and you know, obviously we've made tremendous progress in filling vacancies, and we're in a much different space than we were last year. So certainly appreciate your work.
Keep piling it on. Yes, no, I absolutely agree. You know, wish to adopt everything that the chairman and Commissioner Ellison said. Thank you very much.
Unless you want to go for 2 more hours of that. I don't. Okay, last time on the agenda, communications with commissioners. I'll start with my left this time. Commissioner Aguilera.
So the one thing I wanted to discuss was the special open meeting, or maybe it's just now an open meeting for a workshop for the regional markets, which will be held on January 25th. We haven't issued that notice yet, but we did discuss having it on that date. So this will be a discussion on the Western Markets Exploratory Group studies as they apply to P&M and EPE. And so we have I posted a draft agenda, so you could take a look at it. We'll have some changes there to add more time for stakeholder questions. And the other thing that I wanted to note is that I reached out to Doug Howe, former commissioner, to see if he would be interested to be here with us and ask questions. I think he's very knowledgeable in this area, and I think his presence and experience and his questions will help us as we are conducting the workshop. And so he said he's available, so that's good. If you have any suggestions for the agenda, please work with your advisors and to work with Cynthia, and we can get that input inserted into the agenda. Otherwise, I think we can probably just issue this via single signature order with a short notice of the meeting and then the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to that. And great that Mr. Howe's willing to help. I'll go next. I put an item in board effect. It's a interesting opportunity that is available to all three of us. The State Energy and Environmental Impact Center that's housed at the NYU School of Law is starting something new. So they're going to be pairing up commissioners with advisors, and it's at no cost to us. That's where NYU gets involved. The advisor will be paid for the time spent inviting commissioners through NYU. What I just have to do is commit to participating with my advisor and learning something, which felt awesome and free to me. So I submitted an application this week to be working with Commissioner James Griffin. He was the former chair of the Hawaii PUC. And my understanding is this is an opportunity that's open right until they fill their funding, I think. So if it's interesting to you, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I think, you got to the application has to go in with a potential advisor. So you have to find somebody to pair up with, but just wanted to make sure you knew that I was doing that and also know that it's available to you. And then I did, because Commissioner Griffin was a chair, I did put a bullet in there about learning how to be a better chair. But if I'm not chair in 2 weeks, this is still something I'm excited about doing. It's not contingent upon that, just as reinforcement that it's something that is available to all of us. Commissioner Ellison.
Well, I appreciate learning about that opportunity. Commissioner O'Connell, looks like a really useful thing to take advantage of. I really feel I've communicated enough for one meeting, so I'm going to sit this one out. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel you. Plus, I can't get lunch out of my money. Commissioner Aguilera, do you have any objection to adjourning?
I do not.
Okay, so OGC pointed out to me we're actually supposed to vote, so I move to adjourn.
I second.
Mr. Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
I still want somebody to sue us because we didn't vote to adjourn.
Can we vote that we don't have to?
Well, it's just, I did that Robert's rules review, and if you've only got